Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Vermont State Senate Institutions Committee. My name is Joe Benning. I am the chair of the committee. We also have committee members Russ Ingalls, Corey Parent, Dick Mazza, and Dick McCormick. We are going to be continuing our conversation this week of doing some basic introductions with the players that all fit into the Capitol bill. And since we are live on YouTube, I will repeat that this is a family-oriented medium. You do have the opportunity to post comments on YouTube. I would ask that you understand that there may be some young eyes looking at this at some point in the future. And in addition to which, the FBI has these really great tools that they actually trace back people who are making comments. So I'm begging everybody that may be watching to keep everything clean, and I guess I'll leave it at that. This afternoon, we're going to be hearing from three of the players in the Capitol bill. I see Mike Snyder, Commissioner Mike Snyder, is on the screen with his video running first. So Michael, I am going through the same thing we did basically a year ago and the year before that. We have new players on this committee, and everybody is learning who people are and how they fit into the system. First, if I could ask each of you to identify yourselves by starting with a short biography, and then tell us how you fit into the picture. So Michael, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you, Senator Benning. Excuse me. For the record, Michael Snyder, I'm Commissioner of Forests, Parks, and Recreation. For the brief bio, let's see. I have been Commissioner since 2011, so I'm entering my 11th year as FPR Commissioner, and happy to be doing so, honored actually. Prior to that, I am a licensed forester, and prior to that, I worked as a forester within the department as a county forester for about 14 years. And have about 30 plus some 32 years of experience as a forester in the state, as county forester, as private consulting forester, and working in forest science. But again, the last 10 years as commissioner, overseeing a department that's pretty well named. Our purview and statutory purpose and mission is to provide to monitor the health and productivity of Vermont's forest lands and make recommendations and guidance to Vermont forest landowners to oversee the current use program, the forest land category, and to help manage and steward the public lands, the state forests, state parks, and in partnership with Fish and Wildlife, we do all that, and also including their wildlife management areas. So there's state lands, there's private lands, there's forest health, urban and community forestry. There's a range of, there's quite an awful lot that goes on in the forestry realm, technical assistance, guidance, etc. We also operate the state park system, which includes 55 developed state parks, meaning those are the ones with campgrounds and bathhouses and pavilions and beaches and facilities. They are a mix of overnight camping as well as day use areas. We have in the order of 1 million visitors a year. We've seen, which is really quite something when you consider there's 630,000 of us. And that's only counted visitation. It includes the paid visitation between, say, Memorial Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. It does not include the visitation that continues year round. We make the parks available year round, even though they're not functioning and operating and staffed in the late fall and winter, spring months. It's a complex little business enterprise within state government, and we're quite proud of it. We've seen a 40% increase in visitation in these last 10 years. I think the secret sauce there, frankly, is their wonderful places, natural settings, the capital infrastructure support that you've provided for years allows us to take good care of those facilities and modernize them. These were largely built in the CCC era with another pulse of activity in the 60s. And no matter how you slice it, that means they're old. And so there's a fair amount of maintenance that goes with that and modernization. And we've been doing that on a pretty vigorous scale over the last several years. I'll come back to talk further about the capital program, but I think it's played a big part in our success. I'd just say the third piece is our attention to training of 350 to 400 person seasonal workforce, training them to understand the importance of the visitor experience, customer service, and we do a fair amount of creative, no budget marketing through social media and other partnerships. And again, that's all led to a resurgence in the popularity of the parks. I think it has there are other factors, a down economy. The last downturn in the 2008, 2009, we did see a spike. I mean, that's common that people turn to closer, more affordable options for vacations and outdoor recreation. So I think we've benefited from that as well. But by all accounts, a raging success of late, and we're really proud of that, including last year, which is really quite something that we managed to pull off operating the parks in a shortened season and at reduced capacity, but still pulled it off, and no infections of our staff or guests. And we did pretty well, although the budget side is, because of a shortened limited season, we are and the need to provide nearly $2 million in refunds for canceled reservations. We are in a hole, and that's on the budget side. But everything else seems to be going quite well. And again, I think it's a huge part of it is our attention to across a range of large scale, medium scale, and small scale infrastructure projects. Putting contractors to work around the state. And remember, these 55 parks are they're scattered around and they're near everyone. So it's a big part of our world is operating the state park system. And the last piece that's well named in our title is recreation, our role in providing for and provisioning for outdoor recreation, the public recreation on public lands, as well as on private lands, and partnering with the nonprofit volunteer-based trail groups, in particular Mike Tabanis, Executive Director of the Green Mountain Club, a shining example of partnerships that we have with those kind of entities throughout the state that help us promote and plan and provide for excellent world-class recreation on private lands and public lands. That's the big overview of the department. We're about 140 full-time. We swell to 400 plus in the summer. We have a $28 million operating budget. We are on the forest side, heavy to general fund. The parks, though, is pretty well, almost very little general fund. Of the $14 million budget for operating the parks, about $8 million is generated from our sales of park services. So that's entry fees and the sales of concessions, boat rentals, firewood, ice, etc., merchandise. We generate about $3 million. It varies with ski seasons, but about $3 million annually in revenues from the long-term leases that 7 ski areas have with us to use state lands, state forest and state park lands. Those are from north to south: Jay Peak, Burke Mountain, Smuggler's Notch, Stowe Mountain Resort, Killington, Okemo, and Bromley. Those are 7 major ski areas in the state that we have long-term leases with to use some portions of state forest and state park lands. We receive 5% of the gross ticket sales and 2.5% of the retail. Think, expensive French fries and goggles in the lodge facilities. We get 3% of those retail sales if they're in one of our buildings within the leasehold, like the historic base lodge at Mount Mansfield. So, and then the remainder, then we also generate revenues for the parks from sale of timber on state park lands, telecommunications licenses, a few of them on state parks lands, and proceeds from other licenses, special use permits, et cetera. There's an enormous amount of public use of public lands beyond the paid entry to the developed state parks. So that's how we operate the parks, and it's quite a story. And the last piece is that recreational piece. Again, working with partners. We don't have an appropriation for recreation. We've borrowed from other divisions to create staff. And we are responding to not just an increase in recreational demand, but a diversification of recreational demand. And we saw a lot of that during the pandemic, where we made it a concerted and intentional decision last spring to keep our public lands open. I was conferring with colleagues in similar positions around the country at that time, and most states were really struggling with this and making a decision to close their public lands at the beginning of the pandemic during the shutdown. And we made an intentional decision to keep them open, even though the parks weren't open and operating. And so we put together with our partners in the trail community and the conservation community to put good guidance together to encourage Vermonters to go outside and enjoy these places, but to do so in a COVID-safe way. And we saw that people came out in droves. There are impacts We used some CARES funding, CARES Act money to address some of those impacts and to set up for more. Speak to that a little bit later if you like as well. But I hope that's a quick, reasonably good and somewhat quick overview of the department and our purview and sort of how we're funded and how we operate. I'll pause there.
So before I turn it over to questions from the committee, could you talk a little bit on a budgetary 101 level about how you make decisions in whatever monies are available to you to develop a budget and then come to us to make an ask?
And Mr. Chair, you're referring to the capital budget in particular?
I am. We have
Yes.
One brand new legislator and two other legislators who may not be up to date and familiar with what's the process. So I'd kind of like to get a 101 level vision of how that works.
You bet. Our capital appropriation, which has been about 3 million, a little more some years per year in the biennium, is a really significant and important piece of our work. The way we budget it and come and make an ask is it's heavy to the parks. It's not solely ascribed to parks. We do use some capital funding in state forests for infrastructure projects as well, but it's basically based on the fact that we own and manage nearly 600,000 square feet of building space, the third largest in state government behind BGS and VTrans. We have 1,100 structures, 500 miles of roads and access roads, 200 water and sewer systems, 50 miles of underground piping to support all that. You know, again, it's complex infrastructure that people don't even know, and that's a good thing. You go to a campground and you don't realize just how much there is supporting that. And that's the stuff that we have to take care of and to rehabilitate and to modernize everything from Americans with Disabilities Act compliance kind of modifications to renewable energy modifications to unique and creative wastewater treatment system modifications. So we have an inventory of our assets at about a little under $260 million is the total valuation of that. And we kind of think of it as like, okay, what's the replacement cost? And then what's the cycle of upkeep? And so we kind of put it all on a master sheet. And then we have the minimum is how do we take care of this? And then we have plans for redesign. See, the Alberg State Park recently went through a redesign and a major renovation. So we have the ongoing maintenance, and then we have how can we improve profitability? How can we improve service to Vermonters and our guests? And then we add those kind of special big projects in to this master list. We prioritize and rank. What we try to do is with that money is spread it. And by the way, we're somewhat unique in that our capital appropriation is not line by line for this roofing material and that doorknob and that pump. We put them into big categories and we share with you what those categories are: major rehabilitation projects and revisioning, ongoing general kind of infrastructure maintenance, and then special projects at a smaller. And then we keep the water and wastewater as a whole unique category. And then within those, we present a range of the most needed projects in each of those. We also try to keep an eye to geography and do a little bit in every corner of the state, because we do put an awful lot of contractors to work, and that money goes to them. And we want to spread that around the state. So we have the basic inventory of assets and an understanding of their condition, their status, and their need. We have the kind of wish list to be responsive to changing needs and know knowledge, et cetera. And then we kind of, each cycle for the biennium, we put together the main list of priorities in each of the categories. We internally consider those, take those to the governor's office and make a recommendation. And that's eventually vetted and brought to you as our ask in our capital request. And I hope that makes sense. It's a range of, it's a sort of scales of projects, geography of projects, and timing of projects. We looked for that, by the way, the need to not ascribe capital dollars to any given project is because we need flexibility, because much of the work can't be done during the operating season. So we have a really limited window. We don't want to interrupt our campers when we're doing major rehabilitation. So it has to be done in the off season. That limits us. That limits the contractor availability. It puts us into a pinch in the pipeline of permitting, et cetera. So we need to be able to adjust and make those adjustments. A classic one, which some of you, Senator Mazza, would remember, at the time of Irene and the Waterbury complex, we ended up we just basically gave back a bunch of our capital to take one for the team to help rebuild the Waterbury complex after Irene. And that set us back a little, but it also allowed us that flexibility to move and shake. So it's just one really big example of the need for us to be deft in our deployment of capital funds. I just wanted to be clear about that.
So throughout your conversation, you've been referring to we. Can you tell us about who the staff are that perform these various functions in your division?
Sure. In the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, we have 3 divisions, and there's the Forest Division. That's our biggest one, 55. There's foresters and professionals. And then the park staff, we have about 35 professional full-time parks management. There are a handful of, and the sales and marketing people, the management team that's in the headquarters. And then we have 4 parks regional offices with a regional parks manager, and then a team of facilities managers, maintenance technicians, electricians, wastewater specialists, these sort of tradespeople that really make it hum. And then we use a seasonal workforce to actually operate the parks. Those are the folks, the park managers, the park attendants that are in the contact station when you arrive, and they greet you and they take your reservation and they show you in. They take care of the lean-tos and sweep out the campfire grills, et cetera. So it's a range of full-time professionals, relatively small group of those, and then the 350 to 400 seasonals that come on to help us actually operate the parks. The capital planning is done by our regional managers from their sense of their parks. They each operate a park of 15 to 20, a region of 15 to 20 parks, and they keep tabs, and their maintenance folks kind of keep a running list. That's all filtered on up to us. They make proposals, and then the management team considers those, makes decisions, and I ultimately weigh in. I weigh in at the beginning with big picture guidance, and I weigh in at the end with we can't afford that, or that's not going to fly. And then we try to all come together and keep it rolling. And and when I come in with the capital request, I would usually bring our parks director and our projects manager in with me, because they're really the head of the team. Craig Whipple, kind of a legendary state parks director. He retired last summer. So I'm the acting director right now. We're flying a little bit, a little shy here, but it's my point here is though it shows the value of those year-round full-time professionals who are in the trenches, because they haven't missed a beat and they continue to develop. We're working hard to, eager to come forward with a new proposal, and they're the ones who really get that done.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good lead in. Committee, any questions? Senator Mazza.
I will just add, I represent a district that has a few parks, and the Sandbar is one of the biggest ones around. And I can tell you that I've never, ever received a complaint. They're all run so efficiently in the summertime, and tourists are very pleased. Like I said, I'm in a big tourist area here. And the things they have to do between the septic systems and the water, I can't say enough how good they're operated in my district. And I know it's all over the state, but they do a good job. And thanks to the leadership of Mike, I think they got a good team together. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that very, very much.
Good.
Other questions? Senator Ingalls, got to unmute yourself.
Commissioner, you had mentioned timber sales. Do you have a big portfolio of timber sales that you derive income from?
We do. It's a significant portion of our work, and it's been increasing. We generally, rough figures here, we generally harvest on state forests and state parks, and we help out on WMAs, but my numbers will not include the fish and wildlife piece. But we generally harvest several hundred acres to maybe 1,000 or 1,500 acres a year around the state. and they're mixed projects. You know, they're not about going out and just getting the timber. They're enhancing habitat,
Right.
they're creating access for recreation, et cetera. But we also trying to improve the quality of the timber, and we've done it for a long time. We have some of the best timber in the region on our state lands, and it's I'd say $250,000 to $500,000 in timber revenues typically accrue yearly, and we do so. Proud of this. The cost per acre for generating, there's a cost to develop that revenue, and ours is less than the federal government in their approach. So we feel pretty good about that. But so yes, it's a significant part of our work. The proceeds from timber sales from state park lands go into the Parks Fund. Proceeds from timber sales on state forests go into a different special fund, and those all go back into the land for access improvements, habitat enhancement, water quality protections, et cetera. So yeah, it's significant. We're proud of it. It is it's limited by our need to follow a fairly rigorous process. Our staff, we do this with the 5 district offices for the forestry district offices, with an interdisciplinary team of our foresters, fish and wildlife biologists, watershed folks, and wetlands folks from the DEC. It's an agency approach in each district, and they have to go through inventories and mapping and to create a long-range management plan that includes a public process, scoping, envisioning on the front end, and then public comment on the back end, which then we respond to. And we do this over, we just finished the Camel's Hump management plan. That's 26,000 acres for that unit of land. It's big, it's complicated, it takes a lot of time. And then from that, we have annual stewardship plans, which really are the activity plans every year that reflect the goals of those big long-range plans, and they're more action-oriented each year to implement those long-range plans. The point here is that we're behind. We got behind some years ago, actually before my time in that process. And so we put a lot of effort into catching up so we could get more timber out. And now we're kind of caught up on the timber sales, but we got to go back and start, and we're spending more time on the plans again. So we'll get this synchronized at some point, but we don't recommend to Vermonters, and we don't want to do it ourselves. That is, when times are tough, just run out to the back 40 and slick off the timber. We're trying to grow it for an investment and to try to, reap the growth, but not the principal. And so we kind of balance all that, and there's a process. And I just want to be clear, our foresters love to do it. We'd do more, but we don't get to just run around with paint guns and chainsaws.
Thank you.
You bet. If I could, Senator Benning, before you move on, I sense you might be. I just wanted to make one last point about the parks. When there's benefits that come from the parks. People go to the parks, they have a good time, they're with their families, they're right. It's good for their bodies, but it's also an economic driver. The last estimate from a UVM study was $90 million in direct related spending to parks visitation around the state. So just a very important piece that that's maybe not well known or heralded, but it's pretty key. And our local folks tell us that. The communities, for example, some years ago, a former representative from Franklin County came and said, geez, can you keep Carmi open a little longer? We used to stop at Labor Day because the local establishments benefited. So we did, actually, we extended it to Indigenous Peoples Day, and we received great feedback from that. So we know we have this economic impact locally, and we're happy to try to provide it.
Good to know. And I'm going to ask a question of you myself, but I want to make sure other committee members have had a chance first. Anybody else have a question or a comment? Michael, with respect to parks, you and I had a conversation with Laura Treshman this past, was that in the summer?
It's all a blur to me, Senator.
Well, I am wanting to put together a bill to try to make that conversation go forward. And just for the rest of the committee's edification, my wife bought me a metal detector for Father's Day as a way to get me out of the house during COVID.
That was dangerous.
Well, I ended up over in your neck of the woods, Dick and Corey.
You found something and you haven't shared it with me.
I did, and not until I finished that beach.
Yeah.
Senator Mazza wants you to stay off of his land.
Yeah,
There's
that's
probably
right.
a little buried treasure
If you
there.
find anything in my district, you're going to share it. You know what I mean?
Well, there is one person who knows exactly where I was, and that's the
Oh.
former director of the Lake Champlain Maritime, whatever it's called over there.
Yeah.
In any event, he's given me the idea of a particular location where I should donate what I found. And for those of you that don't know what I found a 1733 British halfpence on the beach on Lake Champlain, northern Lake Champlain. And if you know anything about the history of the state, the English were not in possession of that land at the time that this coin was minted. So the question becomes, how did it get there? I should also point out, I went back later and I came across a very ancient musket ball. So there's a story to tell about this given location. The point of this conversation is that Commissioner Schneider and I had met with Laura Trishman, who is the head of the historical division. And we talked this past summer about the fact that there are probably thousands of historical artifacts that are now disintegrating underground at our various state parks, and how to try to retrieve them in a way that they get preserved for the benefit of Vermonters going forward. And Dick McCormick, I'll use you for an example for a moment. One metal detector was using his detector on private land, and he came up with a belt buckle that had a scripted 53 on the front. And in his research, he found out that the Royalton raid was led by a British officer of the 53rd Regiment of Foot. So that's the kind of artifacts that I'm talking about are now disintegrating underground. And how do we design legislation that can protect them, but also pull them up and conserve them and display them? So Michael, I would like to circle back with you in the not too distant future to try to put our heads together and figure out how to create legislation that would enable that to happen. Are you going to be hanging around for the rest of the conversation?
I can, sure, yes, I'd like to actually. I'll be here.
Well, I just want you to get through Lewis Porter, because the two of you were involved in a discussion about something else completely, and I'd like to at least circle back and figure out what's the update on that particular project.
Okay, and I almost wondered if you might be asking about the Abenaki place names legislation that you pushed through last summer, whenever we did that, and I'm really happy about that. And I just want you to know our folks took to it really well, and so we're awaiting the list of names. For the others, there's a requirement for us to add Abenaki place names where they exist within state parks when we change out signs or create new signs, and we've embraced that. Our folks are on it and eager to start finding names, places that we can put signs on. And so it was fun to work with you on that. Thank you.
So for the new committee members that haven't heard that story, we had some legislation proposed that Abenaki place names would be put underneath the English names on all state parks in the future. And we had one particular controversy when that happened, and that is that different tribes may have different spelling of that name. And how do you resolve that dispute between the tribes? I hope you don't end up with any of those disputes, but if you do, I hope you've gotten around figuring out how to resolve those disputes.
We did. You did in committee. We figured it out. It's that's the purview of the Commission on Native American Affairs. That's what was determined, and they'll be the deciders.
Now I'm seeing Commissioner Porter on the screen, and this may just be the screen quality that I have, but it seems like both of you are starting to join a certain club that some of the rest of us are already in.
That's me, Senator. Lewis has hair I envy. He just cut it all. That's all.
Okay. Commissioner Porter, welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my wife's gotten pretty handy with the hair clippers during COVID, so it's worked out. But I am maybe an honorary member of your club, at least until it grows out.
We had a similar conversation recently on the floor before the Senate got on the floor about wives who are circling around their husbands' heads with sharp instruments and wondering if that's really a smart idea.
Not when your ears stick out like mine. Thanks for having me, Lewis Porter, Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife Department. Glad to
Thank you,
join you.
Lois, the other day for that information. Thank you for you started. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and if they have any trouble, just send them to me and I'll get them to the right people.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate that. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a couple of slides I would like to go through if that works for the committee. And as I do a brief introduction to the department, and then mostly just hoping to have a conversation with all of you about institutions and our work as it relates to your committee. And I want to say thanks to several members of this committee who joined us for our field trip when we could still do such things to some of our wetlands project. And I was grateful to have all of the time with you and have the chance to show you some of those. So if I could, I'll share my screen now, Mr. Chairman.
Are you able to do that?
Oh, apparently I can't, but that's all right. It's not important that I share these slides with you, and I've sent them to your committee assistant if you do want to take a look. But it's they're pretty basic, nothing too urgent for you to see in there. The Fish and Wildlife Department is a sister department or sibling department to Commissioner Snyder's Forest Parks and Rec. The third member of that group is the Department of Environmental Conservation, all housed within the Agency of Natural Resources. We're about 142 full-time employees within my department, and our mission is a pretty great and pretty vast one, which is to conserve the 30,000 or so species within the state of Vermont, give or take, and their habitats. And our departmental mission covers all wild species and plants. So we have a lot of ground to cover within our department. Our department is comprised of 5 divisions. We have the law enforcement division, which is the state fish and wildlife wardens. We have a fisheries division, which manages all fish species in the state and also runs the 5 fish hatcheries that we have within Vermont's borders. We have a wildlife division, which manages all wildlife species, including everything from bumblebees to moose, and also manages the 100 wildlife management areas around the state, which are similar to Commissioner Snyder's state forests, but managed for a slightly different purpose. The primary purpose for them is wildlife habitat and wildlife recreation of various kinds. And the wildlife division oversees them. We manage about 130,000 acres around the state now. And included in that is our newest kind of land acquisition effort through the EPA wetland money, which does those projects, pays for those projects that we got to show off to you, over a year ago now. The next division within our department is we have 2 small divisions. One is education and outreach. They manage all of our media news kind of work. Also, all of our hunter education. Every hunter has to go through hunter education in Vermont. Also, they manage various seminars and trainings and opportunities for people to engage with our staff, engage with our lands, and they also manage the 2 conservation camps in the state. We have 2 summer camps for kids. About 1,000 kids a year go through those 2 camps, and half of those kids go on scholarship and would be unlikely to be able to attend a sleepaway summer camp without those scholarships. The scholarships come from a variety of organizations, rod and gun clubs, different organizations of hunters and anglers and conservationists of various kinds, put money towards those scholarships, and we're extremely grateful to be able to have those kids come stay with us every summer. Unfortunately, in this most recent summer, we were unable to operate those due to COVID, and I'm happy to go into a little more detail on that if the committee would like. And then finally, we have the administrative and the business and licensing office and administrative functions of the department, who manage both our budget and also manage the licensing, the sale of hunting and fishing licenses, trapping licenses within Vermont. We have, give or take, about 130,000 people licensed to hunt, fish, and trap in Vermont annually. The budget for our department is give or take about $26 million. About a third of it comes from hunting and fishing licenses. About a third of it comes from federal excise taxes on guns, ammunition, and sporting equipment. A quarter comes from the general fund. And then we have a few scattered smaller sources of revenue, habitat stamp donations, tax check donations, motorboat registration money, and a few other smaller pots. I'm very proud of how our department has functioned in the last year during COVID and what we've learned during the last year during COVID. We have made a huge number of changes to both our department's operations and how we interact with the public in the pandemic. And frankly, to make a silver lining, or to look for a silver lining in a dark cloud, I think we've learned a tremendous amount about operating effectively and efficiently that will continue even when life returns to normal after the pandemic. For a few examples there, we have moved to online hunter education. We've moved to online big game reporting where we need to due to COVID. We have done all of our public hearings, and we do many of those virtually this year, and we have gotten our staff functioning and more or less completely remotely. The one exception being that the fish hatcheries, of course, need to keep operating. The water needs to keep flowing for those fish to stay alive. So the hatchery workers are our frontline workers. They are at the hatcheries and working there. And perhaps most significantly for the public, we have also gotten about $1.5 million of public access CARES Act money out on the ground in very short order. And these are projects that would be familiar to this committee. Things like providing better access at our access areas. We run 200 access areas around the state, and providing ADA accessible access there, grading and improving roads and parking lots, paving parking lots, providing better stream crossings in some places, as well as some more, I guess, unusual or innovative efforts, including the creation of the first Fish and Wildlife app in Vermont. So we have a app for your phone that's gotten about 5,000 downloads so far in about a month and a half, and has about a 4.5 star rating on the App Store. And we put all these projects together. The reason I'm I guess bragging a little bit about this effort is these all had to be projects that were not in the pipeline before COVID. One of the conditions of the CARES Act money is that it had to be new projects for public access, not just projects you were already working on funded in a different way. And so these were all efforts that we conceived of, designed, got permitted, built, and invoiced in about 2.5 or 3 months. To be honest, when we got the $1.5 million, I really thought we were going to not be able to use all of it and return some of it. And fortunately, our staff really stepped up, and we were able to get all those projects done. So I'll stop there, and happy to take questions about anything in our operations or our mission. Oh, and I should add, we receive typically $1 million a year or $2 million per capital bill cycle in the capital bill. It goes to things similar to what Commissioner Snyder described. Obviously, we have less land, and our land is typically, the amenities are less developed than they are for state parks. But that capital bill money goes to things like roads, making sure that our culverts and bridges are in good repair and are not causing water quality or flooding risks. They go to things like buildings. We have a number of buildings around the state, and equipment. And so I'll stop there rather than drone on, and happy to have a conversation about anything that our department does or why we do it.
So
Thank you.
just before I turn it over to questions from the committee, tell us a little bit about yourself personally and how you ended up in this
Sure.
gig.
Well, that's a great question. I have no idea how I ended up in this gig. Sometimes it puzzles me greatly.
We all don't either, by the way.
Yeah, I get that. I get that a lot. Most of my working career, I was a newspaper reporter for about 10 years, covering government and environment and politics. Then I went to work for a Conservation Law Foundation as a water quality advocate for about 2 years. And sort of to my surprise, Governor Shumlin called me up and asked me to come work in his administration as Secretary of Civil and Military Affairs. And I looked around at state government, and my good friend Pat Berry had this great job as Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife. And I said to him, Pat, if you ever think about doing something different, let me know so I can lobby the governor. And Pat decided driving an hour and a half to the office every day was a long ways, and decided to go and do a different gig. And I was lucky enough that Governor Shumlin appointed me to this job, and doubly lucky that Governor Scott continued to offer me the position. So Michael and I are both holdovers. Don't have quite the longevity that he does. I'm entering into my 7th year in the job.
Great. Committee, questions, comments? Senator Moss.
You know, for those of you who are new to the committee, Lewis Porter has done a fantastic job. If you just imagine how many people have hunting and fishing licenses, and when you get a room full of hunters and you're talking about the deer herd, you can imagine how many different opinions you have. And he's been able to do it. I'll tell you, it's amazing. That's a tough job, I'll tell you, because they're very opinionated on issues about hunting and fishing and trapping, and I'm surprised he's got any hair left at all, because it's a tough one. Everyone has a strong opinion. I remember years ago we used to discuss it on the floor of the Senate, and it went on for days talking about the deer herd and how length the season and when to have it. Now it's in Lewis's shop, and he does a great job of keeping some sort of organization, his skills of keeping everybody kind of happy, because it's very difficult a subject when you start talking about wildlife and hunting seasons and fishing seasons. And so I thank him. Does a good job. Thank you.
Yeah, I got to watch.
Thank you,
last year.
Okay.
I got to watch him last year deal with the anti-bear hunters.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
I'll only dovetail off of that and say that hunters may be an enthusiastic crowd, but they don't compare at all to the walleye guys.
No, no, they're a calm group.
Other questions, comments? Senator Ingalls.
Comments. The app works great. So works really, really well. It's sitting in your tree stand, wondering where shooting hours are and all of that, and what's legal, what's not legal. The app works great. And thank you.
Does it tell you how to get back?
Thank you.
home?
So all it does is it doesn't tell me how to shoot a deer, but that's okay. That's up to me. So,
Senator McCormick.
Thanks. Talking about how hot under the collar some folks get about. What is the current state in Vermont of pickerel shooting?
It is legal, and I think that was your doing that it remained legal, Senator. As I recall, I think you were the deciding vote a number of years ago on keeping it.
To the chagrin of a lot of people, because I thought it was a crazy practice. But I just, I got calls from these old ladies saying, my husband loves pickerel shooting. Don't take that away. You won't let him smoke cigarettes down at the diner anymore. Don't take away pickerel shooting. So
I have to say, we like to promote and encourage people to do all kinds of hunting and fishing activities and other wildlife activities. That's one we don't really promote a lot.
I know. No, it actually is a bad practice.
We don't encourage too much.
Is it slowing down? It seemed to me it was a generational thing, and that it would die out in time.
Yeah.
I think there's a small number of people who are very devoted to it, and it's quite fairly small number of people, but they are very devoted to it. And I don't know how many there are, but I think fewer than there used to be.
Yeah. Used to be popular across the street from my store down here in the swamp, and oh my God, it was big. Now it's gone. You don't hear anything. It's over. Yeah.
Yeah.
Louis, before we let you go, Senator Ingalls, I'd like you to pay particular attention to this line of conversation. Senator Kitchell and I were recently on a Zoom conference with some folks who were dealing with higher education for people who don't fit into schools. And one of them was a woman from your neck of the woods, Russ, who was telling us about her son who needed alternative learning situations. And she went on to describe his love for fish and wildlife officers and how he wanted to be in that as a career. And it led to me saying to her that I would try to hook up with the commissioner. And I did hook up with the commissioner about whether they had a program for riding around with an officer for a day, so to speak. I did not hear back from her after that and lost her email. But the person running that Zoom conference sent her an email and I have not heard back. She may contact you. And if she does, I'm going to ask Louis to talk about the program that's available. But if you find her contacting you, you can now say, you know, the commissioner, you'll call him personally and she'll think you walk on water. You're zoomed, Russ. You're muted, Russ.
I was in on that meeting with you folks, and I do know how to get hold of her, and I will get hold of her, and we'll continue it forward. And thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Louis, if you could just talk about that for the purpose of the public that may be viewing on YouTube.
Sure. So being a fish and wildlife warden is a great job. I think we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 plus qualified applicants for every job that we have posted. It's a demanding job, but a very good job, and one that I think the wardens like a tremendous amount. We do have programs, or we do have availability possibilities for people to go spend some time with a warden if they're interested. I think the limit is over 7. They need to be over 17 for liability reasons. But if somebody's under 17, we can also connect them with a warden just to talk through, you know, the background that people who go into that line of work typically have, or is advantageous to have, and a little bit about what the job is like. The number one attribute that we look for in people that we hire as wardens is judgment. And people are sometimes surprised by that. You know, they think it's woodscraft or knowledge of wildlife or knowledge of law enforcement, and all of those are important. But these wardens, the wardens work primarily alone, primarily a long way, or often a long way from backup. And they have a tremendous amount of authority, and the full authority of the state behind them. And so judgment is really the thing that we look for the most when we're recruiting. And we've got a terrific, we've gone through sort of a generational shift in the warden service in the last couple of years, and many of the wardens are on now are fairly recent hires. And it's just terrific to work with and to know some of these young wardens who are just so smart and so dedicated to their jobs. It's really one of the great things about my job. So I encourage people to get to know their local warden, whether they hunt and fish or not, because it's just good to know that person who's in your community. One of the interesting things about the warden service is wardens have to live within their districts, and you know, frankly, that puts a strain on the wardens when your kid is playing with a kid whose parents maybe you've had a run-in with, or you've ticketed, or you've confiscated a rifle from. That can be stressful, but I also think it really is important because it gives them just a tremendous commitment to their community and knowledge of their community that's really deep. And I'd encourage anybody. There's a Vermont podcast called Rumble Strip Vermont, and she's done a couple of episodes on the wardens, and they're really terrific. some of the best things I've heard or read about that give you a sense of what it's like to be a warden.
I got the books that I sell on the, what's her name that
Yep.
writes those books. I got a whole bunch of those that we sell all about fish and wildlife or the wardens.
Yep.
And stuff. She makes a new book every year, I guess, or a couple books a year. But I've always loved talking to Lewis about what happens when some guy gets out of his vehicle and shoots a deer and it's a dummy deer. I mean, how do they feel when they get caught? You know,
Twice.
pretty embarrassing.
Twice in the last few years, we've had somebody shoot a decoy. The wardens run up and say, "State game warden," and they said, "Hold on, okay, but hold on, I gotta shoot this deer," and they shoot again.
I love it. How embarrassing that is.
I should note that as a 37-year criminal defense attorney, we always have fun with cops cross-examining them because there is inevitably a place where they're going to screw up somewhere along the way. But fish and game wardens, no way. Those guys know everything upside down, backwards, and forwards when you go into a courtroom, and there is just no way of beating it.
Oh my
One of those silly stories about a guy getting nailed shooting one of those things was one of my most recent trials.
Oh no.
It was just forget it. I mean, the warden knew everything there was to know. My guy just got plastered, and it's just one of those stories. But that's a compliment to your wardens. They really do know what they're doing. I'll only move on from there by saying that if judgment is your number one criteria, that rules out me and everybody else on this page for playing.
We were fortunate enough to have Norman Morrill up in our area, and just story after story. And I know him very, very well. And we could be all day talking about Norman Morrill.
It's got to be funny because when you're caught shooting a decoy, you know. One
of the ones, just quickly, and I apologize, but he was talking about he had seen this action down in this field, and he walked down in, and these folks had shot a deer, and they were dragging it out, and one of them just yelled right out, "Come and arrest me, Norman," and he says, "So I did."
Lewis, while you're still here, I'm going to ask both you and Michael something. But Michael, I'd just like to circle back to you quickly and ask, is there any kind of program for young people who want to become involved in parks and recreation?
Definitely. We hire, and right now the call has been put out. So our seasonal workforce includes a lot of young people. And including, we have made arrangements and special arrangements for bringing in extra young people. So, it's not a training program, but we have accommodated that interest, and we have some folks who started as teenagers and have stayed with us. So that's one way, just the normal seasonal workforce, which is quite popular, and folks come back year after year. We have at the agency tried to maintain internship programs through the agency in each of the departments. We do a bunch with UVM in particular. We hire seasonal forestry staff. Those are often from forestry schools, and kids are on their way to getting a degree and come get experience with us. That's on the forest side. But yeah, we through the normal hiring, the seasonals, that's the best way. Internships as well. And then we have volunteers as well. And that's a really great way, is folks who just want to, give up their time, volunteer. And that's a great way to get a leg up for the next year of hiring or to move on to another place.
So thank you for that. And Russ, again, you now know Commissioner Schneider, and if your constituents are asking those kinds of questions, you know who to contact. And again, they'll think you walk on water.
Thank you.
And I welcome it. Please do. Where parks are concerned, all over the public lands, we take our host communities, as we think of them, as very seriously, and try to maintain great relations and want to be in touch. And your constituents are very commonly, all of your constituents are in touch with us, and we try to give quick answers. And when you folks get questions, and if you need help answering them, come to us and we'll help you out. We are here to do that. I know that's the same for Fish and Wildlife. We do it a lot.
So while both of you were here in the last engagement with the Capitol bill, it seems to me that we were trying to figure out something for you guys to have new offices. How did that go?
Looks great, huh? Yeah, I think that's all kind of on hold. I think we're in work from home for the foreseeable future. We've adjusted to that, as Commissioner Porter did a nice job of explaining. And that, by the way, it's similar for us. We've had to make all kinds of adjustments. So staff have adapted quite well, and to try to maintain services to the Vermonters from remote locations. So I don't know, Commissioner Porter, if you have anything to add on that, but it remains of interest, I would say, but I don't know that we've moved anything further. Some other things have kind of pushed that to the back burner. Commissioner, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think that's spot on. I mean, we both of our departments, obviously our folks work all over the state. Both of our departments have offices all over the state. And so we're sort of always in the constant effort to make sure we're using those efficiently and we're getting, the right office space at the right price. And so I think it does remain of interest to us. And, but we have to figure out how significantly our operations are going to change in the long term, based on what we've learned from COVID.
I'm trying to think, was it Windsor or Springfield? We were talking about
Right.
facilities.
Well, both actually. It's the Springfield district for both of us, but we were thinking about the Windsor, the former Windsor Prison Farm as a potential location. And I think both of us went down with BGS and others and looked at that facility. I think there's some possibility there, but I think it would be quite a bit of work to get it set up and outfitted. And then COVID came along, which sort of put everything else aside for the time being.
But there was money set aside in the capital bill for that, if I recall correctly.
There was money for, yes, there was money set aside in the capital bill. And I think it was in the BGS line item. And I do not know what the current status of that is with BGS, given the COVID situation, but we will circle. I will touch base with BGS and circle back with you.
We'll be asking those kinds of questions when we get a little more involved in substantive conversation. But Dick McCormick, you better understand that if we decide we're going to claw some money back from someplace, your neck of the woods might be one of the places we look towards. That's a joke, guys.
The Windsor prison land has been a problem for years. Just what do we do with it?
Yep.
And people don't agree.
We solved some of that problem for you by making the land outside of the prison area a wildlife management area.
Yes.
We're in the process of doing some management planning there right now. But yeah, the prison facility itself is a big space with a lot of buildings of different kinds.
It's off the beaten path. The problem is it's so far down. It's not central Vermont, so you can't have a lot of any facility that's going to require traveling that much. It was all right for a prison, but
right.
I don't know. Yeah.
Senator Benning, if I realized in listening to Commissioner Porter, I left out kind of it's a short, small piece, but it's a really important piece, and it speaks to your next witness. Could I have a couple minutes just to add another component of our work at FPR that I somehow gapped?
If it works, you can introduce Michael DeBonis at the same time.
Okay, so the piece I left out is Forest, Parks, Recreation, but within it we have this third division, Forest Division, Parks Division, and then the Lands Administration and Recreation Division. The Lands Administration, think of it as kind of the real estate records shop for the agency, housed in FPR. It's heavy to FPR. This is the deeds, easements, maps, surveys, licenses, leases, the land records, if you will, for the agency lands. And in partnering with principally Fish and Wildlife, to some extent DEC, on kind of administering the public lands, not managing, administering. That's the records and all the legal stuff, right? And it also includes the folks who do land conservation, the acquisitions of fee simple ownership of state lands, as well as easements held on private lands, and in working with groups like the Green Mountain Club to protect the Long Trail, et cetera. So that's where conservation, acquisition, protection comes in. It's our lands administration recreation shop. It's a tidy little shop. It's only a handful of folks. We have a couple of licensed land surveyors that do the land surveying for the entire agency. When we have boundary issues and new adjustments and new parcels, et cetera. So it's really an important and kind of a historic role, and it's, a very important one. And I feel bad that I overlooked it, especially with Mike here. And but it offers a good segue to Mike DeBonis, Executive Director of the Green Mountain Club here, where, as you know, they have engaged with you on the capital program, and you've been great about supporting acquisition of lands, private lands, to protect the Long Trail. So Mike is far better to speak to that than I, but I appreciate the chance to add in a piece that I missed. Thank you.
Great. Mike, as you entered this conversation, I'm not sure whether you were here in the beginning, but this committee right now is on a kind of a 50,000 foot overview of everybody who's involved with the capital bill. It would be helpful if you tell us not only who you are, but what you're all about, how you got the gig you're in right now, and what exactly do you think about the future for what you're trying to do with the Green Mountain Club?
Thank you, Chairman Benning, and thank you, Commissioner Snyder and Porter. I've kind of share the stage here a little bit. I kind of feel like I'm eating at the adult table at Thanksgiving a little bit, but that's all right. So I'm Mike DeBonis. For the record, I'm Executive Director of the Green Mountain Club. I'm joining you from Moortown, Vermont. I've been Executive Director of GMC for about 7 years, and I can attest to the value of seasonal work. I cut my teeth in conservation, picking up cigarette butts and cleaning toilets at Granbury State Park. So I started out in conservation in state parks, and I still can't look at a urinal without trying to pick the cigarette butts out of it. It's just been ingrained in me for life. And I'd say Vermont State Parks, having traveled around the country, they're definitely the finest in the land, and that's a real feather in our cap into Commissioner Snyder. I'm a forester as well. And I, after working in state parks, went to forestry school, and I was a forester out west for a number of years, but had always loved the Long Trail, hiked it when I was younger, and spent a lot of time in Boy Scouts, and had an opportunity to come back when the ED job opened up and jumped at it. I was living in New Mexico. My wife was living in Seattle, Washington, and we said, forget it, we're going to do it. You only get a chance like that probably once, and it's really been a wonderful experience. And yeah, I'm happy to kind of give the 30,000 foot level for folks, and appreciate just a couple minutes, and I will be just a couple minutes. The 111-year-old Green Mountain Club is the founder and maintainer of Vermont's Long Trail. It's the oldest long distance hiking trail in the nation. It runs 272 miles across the crest of the Green Mountains from the Massachusetts border to Canada. And the Green Mountain Club is primarily charged with the stewardship of the trail. All told, we manage about 500 miles of hiking trails. We have conservation interests in about 30,000 acres of land, and we employ about 30 to 40 folks every summer, every hiking season, that serve as trail crews and backcountry stewards and construction crews. And all recreation in Vermont is local, and you don't do anything alone. And so we work very closely with private landowners. They make the whole thing happen. Our state and municipal partners to really manage this system. And I would say that we're a pretty small player from the capital bill side of things, but I like to think that we're hopefully an important player. In 1985, the Vermont legislature recognized the Long Trail as a unique and irreplaceable resource whose protection is a great benefit to the people of the state of Vermont, and resolved that the General Assembly supports the effort of the Green Mountain Club to protect the Long Trail. As I was putting this together, looking at that, I think the words of the General Assembly have tremendous resonance as COVID-19 has amplified the importance of outdoor public spaces. And as the commissioners mentioned, the interest in outdoors has been really off the charts. This past hiking season, we saw a sustained 35% growth in visitation to the Long Trail system. If you spend any time out there, the busy places were still busy, but the quiet secret places were also busy, and they're busy today, and they'll be busy tomorrow. We've seen a tremendous interest in outdoors. And I think the ability to spend time and escape to the outdoors, whether it's a Long Trail or whether it's a local park, has really proved essential. And it's really a feather in Vermont's cap. We launched the Long Trail Protection Program in 1986. And over the last 35 years, the club's worked with private landowners, Forest Parks and Rec, other partner organizations like the Trust for Public Land, to protect over 88 miles of the Long Trail and conserve more than 25,000 acres of land. And of that 25,000 acres, 17,500 acres has been added to Vermont State Forest System that's managed by Commissioner Snyder's shop. And that's been thanks to $3.5 million in appropriations funding through the state's capital bill. So it's a tremendous investment, a significant investment that this body has made in this public resource. You know, honestly, nobody probably could have the vision that a global pandemic. They definitely didn't have that in mind 30 plus years ago when the decision was made to protect the Long Trail system. But the pandemic shows us now the importance of that decision and the value that public lands have in the lives of Vermonters. I think it's hard for us to think what it would be like if we didn't have these. You know, it would have been an even more difficult year. So my role is I work very closely with Commissioner Snyder and Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation. We don't come to the legislature every year, but we work continually to identify properties with the goal of permanently protecting the Long Trail system. There's about 6.5 miles left of unprotected lands, and these are the hardest to get. We work with willing landowners, and the property that we just protected last year, the Cotting Hollow property, we've been working on that for 34 years, and we finally did it at the end of the year, and we transferred it over, and it's now part of Long Trail State Forest and managed by Commissioner Snyder's shop in perpetuity. So a real win. And so we come before this body and on the House side to share project opportunities when they become available. And again, just really appreciate the time today and the opportunity to share the work with the Green Mountain Club with you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hey, any questions?
Senator Gannon got me involved a long time ago, and it goes way back. And boy, I'll tell you, he was a big supporter, and we've come a long way over those years. And, 6.5 miles. I hope I see the day it's all purchased.
Yeah.
I'm working on it.
Senator Ingalls.
Director, is it just the Long Trail that you are responsible for?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. No, you're right. So we manage the Long Trail and the side trails, but we also manage the Appalachian Trail in Vermont. So the Appalachian Trail shares the footpath with the Long Trail for the first 100 miles, and then it takes a right-hand turn in Mendon and Killington and heads northeast to Maine. And so we're responsible for managing the Appalachian Trail in the state as well.
Other questions? Senator McCormick.
Thanks. Before a question, I just want to express appreciation. I've hiked the entire Long Trail, and it's wonderful. It's and it's good that we're preserving it. Speaking of the Appalachian Trail, what is happening with land acquisition in Chattagee? The No Town section of Chattagee.
Yeah, there are a few parcels of unprotected land within that federal corridor. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy is working with us, is largely responsible for those land protection efforts, and they use a similar model working with private landowners. So I don't have an update today, but Senator, I can talk to the folks I work with and follow up with you on the status of that particular acquisition.
Thanks.
So to dovetail off of Dick's proud announcement that he walked the entire thing, I will have to say, Mike, that this past summer, I actually hiked 4 miles of it. And I was only supposed to hike about 1, because on both occasions that I did this, I was providing a food drop to my son who was hiking the distance. And the first time I hiked about a half a mile in to make that food drop, and then hiked a half mile back. So there's my first mile. The second occasion, however, was a little more interesting. Up in, it's north of Johnson, I think around Spruce Peak. The attempt to make a food drop, he wasn't where he was supposed to be when I got to the location. And I got concerned, but my car was right there. So I decided I was going to hike in and I'd meet him on the trail somewhere. I knew which direction he was heading. And I hiked in opposite of the direction he was coming from. And about, I would say 2.5 hours later, I was getting really concerned because I hadn't run across him and it was getting dark. And of course, my cell phone was useless. So frantically, I ran back down to the car. And there he was right next to the car the whole time. I had hiked about 3.5 miles in. And that was my story of how I've done a part of the long trail.
There.
If you string a few more of those together, Senator, you'll get the whole thing done.
Right.
Someday.
Well, I've never hiked it, but I drove by it once. So.
When did you do it, Dick? How many years ago did you do it? Dick,
Full disclosure, I did the long trail in shorter segments. I'm saying over time, I've done the entire trail. And actually, the trail I hiked has never existed at one time because the path does change from time to time. I went through Jonesville before the bridge was there, for example. And there are sections of the trail that get moved just to avoid erosion or because of landowner issues. So, but I have
you
gone.
started one end. You started one end and went to you could complete the both end to end.
I've done all that. I actually started at Killington many years ago and got up, I guess, about as far as Camel's Hump, the north side of Camel's Hump, and then decided I really ought to do the south before I go continue up to Canada. So then I did a lot. Also, when I had kids, the southern part of the trail is better for kids because it's not quite as difficult and you get to swim every day, or most days you can end up near water.
So both of
It was
my
great.
kids.
It changed. Go on.
Both of my kids have hiked the length in a single walk. And there's always this question about, do you go from north to south or south to north? My daughter was the first to hike it. And when I asked her, which direction are you going to go? She said, who the hell would want to walk to Massachusetts?
Oh, I want to say something else. When my son Noah was about, I guess, 11, living in a small town like Bethel, his choice for friends in town were either what he considered goody two-shoes or really, really troubled kids who were, really behaving badly. And he found the juvenile delinquents fascinating. So he hung out with the bad boys. And my brother Kurt and I took him on a hike, and he was 11 years old. And it was right at the time of year when the through hikers are coming through. And he suddenly discovered these athletic, crazy guys with feathers in their caps and stuff. And it was a whole new model. And his entire life he's an outdoorsman. He's, an extreme skier and very athletic and very healthy. And he says it all came from that particular hike.
Joe, they probably let you take your motorcycle end to end, you know what I mean, without a helmet.
Yeah, I'll bet they would. Michael, is your office still in Stowe?
Yeah, we're just right there in Waterbury Center. Like a lot of us were largely working from home this summer. We did have all of our field staff based out of headquarters and still going there about a day a week. But we're planning on a full season next year with a lot of unknowns like everybody else. But we saw a lot of use and I think some areas were definitely need some work. So we've got a lot of work lined up and we're excited to go, and we're in the hiring process right now. And so we're looking to hire about 40 plus folks to spend the summer in the mountains of Vermont, which is a pretty great thing.
Yeah, for the rest of the committee, my daughter actually worked for the Green Mountain Club years ago, and I'll tell you, it was one of the most beneficial things for her. Not only did it introduce her to nature and the backwoods, all that, but she's developed lifelong friends as a result of that. So anytime you get an opportunity to send somebody down there. And you yourselves, if you get the opportunity to go down and take a little trip to their headquarters, it's a really nice experience. Not seeing any other hands raised with questions, we're going to call it for the afternoon. Gentlemen, I appreciate you coming to join us today. I am sure we will be hearing from you again as we get the capital bill and pull you in to tell us why it is you need the money you're asking for.
Senator, at the risk of keeping you off from your weekend here, I realize there's one additional thing I need to mention. May I? That is just for the new members. You are also where we come for the joint resolutions that we request almost every year for legislative approval for certain real estate transactions where we would be disposing of state lands or assets. So it's been a good thing. We have a basic process, and that usually begins with you, as the House usually begins with the capital bill. So I'm not sure we're going to be bringing a joint resolution request this year for legislative approval, but we are pondering that, and I'll be in touch with you, Mr. Chair. And I just so no one's surprised that is, again, it's part of our normal bailiwick with you, right? So I thought I should mention it.
Great. Thank you all very much for coming. Committee, before you hang up, I just want to let you know that we're going to get into some substantive conversations next week. But I want to remind you that at some point, Beth Pierce is going to be shipping us her report on suggested changes to make to the pension problem we have. If you get that this weekend, try to spend some time reading it, because we're going to really do some grilling next week.
Mm-hmm.
Denise, if you can hang on with me, and the rest of you can all have a great weekend.
Thank
You
you.
guys all have a great weekend.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Bye-bye, folks.
You as well.
Thank you.
You. And Denise, we need to come off of YouTube. You're muted and we're still